Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to the final music podcast episode of 2023. I know that it got a little sporadic there for a while, but I did want to do a final kind of rundown of the year, and obviously thank you all for sticking with me on this journey. It's been an interesting one for me anyway, an interesting outlet for me to kind of speak into the void and say my thoughts about some of my favorite music and some of my favorite music in the year. I know I didn't touch a whole bunch of on stuff throughout the year. I did a lot of retrospective looking back at music that meant a lot to me. So in doing that, I know that I missed a lot that happened this year. So I'm going to try to rectify that by doing kind of a rundown of some quick observations from things throughout the year, some things that I didn't miss personally, but I didn't share with you guys. So I just want to start by saying thank you, as always, for being here and for sharing your time with me. And as always, I'm going to try to make this not super, super long. I say that every episode and it ends up being super, super long, but I thank you for listening to me anyway. Music. So I have my notes of things that I really kind of want to go over so that I'm not spending too much time on a lot of different things. So just bear with me as I try to get through this. Thank you so much in advance for listening to me. You know, I thank you every time because it's easy to put it on the background, but I know it's kind of a drain to listen to somebody's voice for 45 minutes to an hour and a half sometimes. But you guys stick through it, and I really appreciate it. So I am going to start by just kind of looking through some of the major events that happened through this year. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about, obviously, is that 2023 marked the official 50th anniversary of hip-hop. I know I touched on a couple artists that were very important to me in the genre, and one of them obviously being J Dilla. I kind of just had one of those moments where I went back and listened to Donuts again and realized how not impactful it was, not only impactful it was for hip-hop, and it kind of changed the oral profile of what it meant to be a hip-hop artist and a hip-hop composer, but it really did affect me emotionally, especially understanding where it came from and how it came to be. So I kind of I'm not going to go through all of the festivities that happened throughout the year. I do just really need to show my reverence and show my appreciation and kind of commemorate this momentous cultural occasion, because really, since it's more commercial, I guess, and mainstream inception, hip-hop has kind of been the thing that's changed the scope of popular music as it became more and more of a popular art form and something that people gravitated toward, especially younger people. It really did shift the cultural perspective, and it put a very heavy spotlight on Black and brown, underprivileged kids for the most part, and the talent that is kind of built from trauma and struggle, when honestly it's an art form that's meant to incite fun and kind of really talk about what's happening in actual life as it happens. And I think the thing that I kind of want to touch on most is that this is an art form of, by, and for Black and brown people. And obviously, it's become universal. It's incredibly highly lucrative. Much of the mainstream appeal has been that it appeals to this sort of fantasy understanding of what it means to live in an inner city situation if you are someone that is Black or brown, and kind of adjacently being involved in that culture and in that community. And as much as I don't want to dwell on any sort of the negative aspects that kind of comes from that understanding of a lived experience that the people who are ultimately running the record companies and who are buying the records, not all, because there are some very key figures that's not the case, but a lot of them are run by older white men who this is not something that they have any experience in. There are a few who, even without the first-hand experience, are very respectful of the culture and really lean on the people who live that experience to really capture what it means to be from that life. Rick Rubin obviously comes to mind. He's the godfather. What can you say? There's nothing but wonderful things that you can say about Rick Rubin in terms of what it is that he really did to amplify this art form. But what I want to say is that hip hop is for the people. Hip hop is steeply, heavily grounded in culture and community. And when I say hip hop, those who know. I guess I'll touch on it a little bit for those who kind of think of hip hop and all they think of is Drake, or they think of rap videos or rap artists. The most, obviously the most popular. Hip hop is not one thing. Hip hop is elemental. Hip hop is cultural. It's the same idea of how people have now transcended what K-pop is, but hip hop has always been more than one element. It's always been the art. It's always been graffiti. It's always been breaking. It's always been DJing. It's always been, and it's always been the MC. There are 5 elements of hip hop, and obviously I only touched on 4. But honestly, it's an entire cultural phenomenon that is built upon 5 very non-movable tenets. And we have, obviously, as it became more and more mainstream, associate hip-hop to only mean rap, and also the aesthetics, if you will. I don't want to just say the street style, the clothing, but it's the aesthetics of it. We have gotten a little bit away from the physical art of it, which is graffiti, and especially the reasons behind the graffiti. It's about identity. Ultimately, hip-hop is about identity and about claiming and owning and holding on to that identity and being true to yourself, true to your neighborhood, true to your people, true to your loved ones, and true to your experience. And again, even in the thing that people most associate with hip-hop rapping, we've moved a little bit away from that. But at the end of the day, this is a genre. This is a culture, not just a cultural impact, quote unquote. This is a culture that has lasted for 5 decades, for half a century. Something that everyone who had anything to say about it that wasn't positive said would go away in 2 to 3 years. Well, Sugar Hill Productions kind of nipped that in the bud. Prior to that, you obviously had Zulu Nation and Afrika Bambaataa, and there's a lot that goes into that I won't go into. But it all stems from this storytelling aspect of what it is to be a Black person. That stems from our roots in our respective African countries, and even within that, our own tribes. But there's this history of storytelling that has been throughout our entire existence as a people on this planet. And it's our way of communication. It's our way of expressing our pain, our joy, our trauma, our triumphs, the things that make us human, things that make us different as individuals, but also makes us a family. It makes us a community. And that's what hip hop is. That's 100% what hip hop is. And I can't speak on how that is in terms of every other genre, but especially because I'm really just trying to focus on this. Hip hop was always built on this foundation of community, 100%. And so I have to give 100% my flowers to the first time that I actually recognized hip hop as a genre, the first time it actually rang true to me, the first time that I interacted with it and I felt it. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I knew that it was something that I honestly felt was real, and it gave me a feeling of excitement and enjoyment, and it also let me understand the true musicality of what it is to be in this genre. I know I said a whole lot to basically say my first memory of hip hop, which it actually is. My first memory of hip hop is Diggable Planets, Cool Like That. And it's because I had been raised around a lot of melody. I'd been raised up with a lot of R&B, a lot of soul music, some jazz and gospel. And Diggable Planets was my introduction, my first conscious introduction into rhythm and poetry. That's what rap is. That rap is not a singular word. It's an acronym for rhythm and poetry. And that was my first conscious understanding of what that was. And from then on, anytime I was confronted with this thing called rap, it came in so many different flavors. So many different people had different ways of expression. Cadences were different. The way they interacted with the music, because it was always rap, you have to understand, was not what it was called. It was literally called emceeing because these were people who were the masters of ceremony. They were the ones who ran the party. The DJ was the star because he's the one that had the music. So it was always this back and forth. It's always been in hip hop, this back and forth between the DJ and the MC. There's always been this relationship between rap and music. And understanding that in the microcosm of hip hop, in this small little section of rap, it really does allow you to understand how incredibly musical, how incredibly integral and important this genre is for everyone who's ever been associated with it. And so I have to thank Diggable Planets for being my actual first introduction into what it meant to be a part of hip hop. I also want to say that regardless of what I feel about every artist, I'm not a fan of every artist. I did mention one artist in particular, and I'm not a fan of every subgenre necessarily. But what I will say is that in hip hop kind of becoming more pop, quote unquote, it does follow the kind of same trends and the same rules as you would expect from pop music, which is there are eras in which everything kind of sounds the same, and it is with every single genre. So this is not picking on hip hop in particular. This is just how popular music kind of goes. It follows trends, and considering what we have in terms of social media with things like TikTok and the phenomenon of wanting your 15 minutes very quickly, it's easy to forget that this is a genre that is very much based on a desire to escape heartache and trauma and pain. And in that, you will find that people exaggerate their accomplishments. They exaggerate what they have. It is very much all about bravado, which is, part and parcel. You can say the same thing about rock and roll. It's always been about bravado. It's always been about kind of exaggerating your grandeur. And it does kind of get repetitive with newer artists. Like I said, that's kind of just how pop music goes. And I want to be very clear that because of the nature of where rap music is now, being the actual most popular genre in the world at the moment, and the most influential in terms of what you see happening in pop culture, there are going to be things that I don't necessarily like. That being said, I can't imagine a musical landscape in which hip hop doesn't take such a big focal and such a big role in how popularity and trends and culture shifts. And it's been that way for 50 years. And I can't do anything but praise the origins of it. I can't help but praise the constant evolution of it. That's, I think, what I was getting at. While where it has sort of hit a plateau of certain types of content, because that's what people are actually creating now is content. It's gotten to that point where everything needs to be monetized. Everything is based on an algorithm. That does not erase the fact that in even that is incredible evolution. It's a genre that has always been in the hands of a younger public. And there will always be young people until this earth stops spinning. So therefore, evolution will always happen in hip hop, and hip hop will always be the first to evolve. And I think that when it's a lot to do with, because it's in the hands of Black and brown people, there'll always be this movement forward, because there's always this constant need for progression, even when we're standing still. So hip hop, I say it again, is the culture. It is what invokes conversation. And even if it's conversation that's not necessarily positive all the time, it inspires people to talk and to take notice and to question and to even debate sometimes. There are classes. Ninth Wonder, one of the greatest producers of all time, Ninth Wonder, teaches a class on hip hop. Lupe Fiasco, I think, was teaching an adjunct class at one point. You have these incredible proponents of hip hop and rap who are doing more than spreading the gospel of what it means to be a rap artist or what hip hop means. They're explaining what it means to be within this culture, within the context of a culture that constantly wants to degrade you. And so I love hip hop, and I may not know every artist. I may not know every bar. I may not know the history of every single thing, but I do know how it affected me, and I do know how it continues to affect me. So I have to give nothing but praise to hip hop. Happy birthday, hip hop. I know I'm a little bit late, but I did not forget you. Happy birthday, and thank you for everything. Moving right along to something that is a little bit out of left field, but is still very important to me nonetheless. My introduction to Korean music was not this group, but this was my second actual introduction to Korean pop music. And this was the time that I took notice. Again, there's always that moment where you've known about it before, but then something grabbed you and made you actually take notice. I mentioned it with hip hop. I'd always heard it around, but Digable Planets was my introduction to really taking it in. Dongbang Shinki, the Rising Gods of the East, Tonfan Shinchi, Toho Shinki, whatever you want to call it, had their 20th birthday on Christmas. It is the 20th anniversary of DBSK, my ultimate K-pop group. It was my first and continues to be my favorite in every permutation. And I'm not going to get too much into that again. I'm trying to kind of compact all of the thoughts and things that I have, and I'll most likely do an episode on Dongbangshiki. It is going to happen. But now what I want to do is just to acknowledge the profound impact that all 5 of these men had on popular music worldwide. Yes, they were a group that spawned in 2003 on a Britney Spears and BoA Christmas special, singing a song that is so cheesy that I barely listen to it. But, what you understand to be K-pop now, what you understand as the Hallyu Wave, is compliments of 2 artists from SM Entertainment, the first entertainment company in Korea that's generally specialized specifically in music made for and by young people. SM Entertainment. You have to thank BoA, the princess, the queen of K-pop, and Dongbangshiki, literally the gods of K-pop. It's their name. And they followed through. And I mean in every single permutation. When I say that, they started as 5. This is the thing. I have a love-hate relationship with SM Entertainment, and this group is specifically the reason why. You will never find anybody in your life pettier than SM Entertainment is with the 3 men who left DBSK. Never. Even with their 20th anniversary, they couldn't help themselves. They absolutely could not help themselves. And, I aspire to that level of petty, to be honest. But that's something that's for another day. I want to give my thanks and love to every single member of that group. And in order of their ages, because I'm not going to do it in terms of bias, again, a conversation for another day. Kim Jae-jung, Chung Yoon-ho, Park Yu-chan, Kim Jung-soo, and Shim Chang-min, thank you so much for being you, for being the ones to start this, for being the ones to put yourselves through so much for the sake of following your dreams. Coming from, most of them came from not great circumstances. And they had a dream and they followed that thing and they did what had to be done. And it was not pretty and it was painful. And there was a lot of sacrifice for kids who one of them started when he was 9 or 10. They lived, breathed, ate, drank, slept this life. And all of them, in one way or another, have continued to do it. Varying levels of success, varying levels of popularity. 3 of them being blacklisted for a decade. Count that 10 years, not being allowed onto television to perform their music in their home country. While 2 of the members are allowed to sing their legacy. And again, I'm not going to go too deep into it because if I do, we'll be here for a long time and then I will just become upset and emotional. But at this point, all I can do is say thank you. There's a lot that goes into talking about Dongbangshiki in particular. This is a group who is absolutely your bias group's bias. It is a rite of passage for every single idol in their first or second year, doesn't matter what entertainment company they are from, to sing either Neurotic, Rising Sun, Hug, Balloons, or a combination of all 4. Every single thing that you understand about this genre, about this phenomenon known as K-pop, you have to give praise to the rising gods of the East. And I give praise, flowers, acknowledgement, and all of my thanks to this group for not only being a benchmark, but doing it vocally. Like, let me tell you something. They were not the first to introduce this idea of pop music to Korea. by a long shot. And that's another conversation for another day. But the way that they did it and the way that it was regimented, they were modeled after Motown groups. So therefore vocals and training and perfection, as close as you can get to that for kids, that all came from Motown. And so it was about quality and class first. And SM, especially in their first 3, 4, 5 years, was about class and it was about perfection. And DBSK hit it in a way that hadn't been seen before by anyone, because every single one of them, all 5 of them, is talented. Every single one. And all of them can vocally do something different. All of their vocal personalities are different. You won't hear voices like that in any other group, not that way. And if you do, it's because they're modeling themselves after these gentlemen here. So I can do nothing but give my respect to them. And also I have to thank them for pulling me out of a really dark, dark place when I came to them. I was not in a very great mental situation, and spiritually my life was a little murky, and my friend pulled me out of the doldrums of working the evil day job, we call it, working for the state. She said, you have to listen to this artist. He's gorgeous. He has a voice like you wouldn't believe. He plays football like Maradona, and he has an ass like the American Dream. And I was like, I love all of those things. And it was Kim Jin-soo. And I said, who is this man who is painted gold? The song was Intoxication, by the way. If you know, you know. Who is this man's? And she said, he's part of this group. And she gives me a rundown of the history. She said, whatever you do, start here. Do not start with Melodic. I started with Melodic because that's, of course, the first thing I found. At the time that I came to it, it was it was one of the highest viewed videos on YouTube when I came to it. Circumstances happened, it was pulled down, and then they had to build that back up when there were only 2 of them. You guys. For those who came to TVXQ, DBSK, however you think of them, for those who came to them as a duo, for their formative years and for the year that actually got them to the point where they could succeed as a duo, they were 5. So, I want you to understand something about them. I have nothing but respect for Yuno and Changmin for carrying this legacy, because they carried. And they carried having to deal with a lot of opposition from this fandom. Cassies are a vitriolic bunch. If you think armies are bad, if you think XMLs are bad, they're annoying and childish. Things got raw on the playground when Cassies were running the world. But, I mean, the early days of pop music, the early days of pop groups, things were a little bit different. And things were less about bigger and more about catch me outside. How about that? That's what the energy was. And, them having to go through that, them having to continue to create, to express themselves, even under circumstances with their company that weren't ideal, and to have made it 20 years, and 15 of those years as a duo. They are a legitimate duo now. I won't ever think of them as DBSK. I have to kind of separate them into TVXQ because of that, but it does not separate them from the legacy by any stretch of the imagination. The 3 that left, known as JYJ, Jaejun, Yuchun, and Jinsu, they had it rough. And for one of them in particular, they continue to have it really rough. And still managed to succeed in every endeavor that they tackled. Every endeavor that they dove themselves into, because they loved it so much and they desired and needed a means to express themselves and the pain that they were going through. they held their own and continue to. Kim Junsu is the reason why idols are on Broadway. They're the reason why idols are in musicals. Kim Junsu is the reason why idols are in musicals. Kim Jae-jung is still considered the idol. He is the one. Everyone looks up to him because he's kind of ethereal and he's been since he started at SM, right? Yoo-chun broke the mold on what it meant to be an actor who came from an idolship, who came from that training and background. They had to do a lot of things differently because they weren't allowed to do things traditionally. And of course, I have respect for the three of them. They were the vocal core of the group. That's 60% of the group, and all three of them, Yoo-chun especially, was the bass. And then you had both the main vocal and the lead vocal, who were two different people, leave the group. So you had the dancer and leader and the maknae, the youngest, stay. That's rough for everybody involved, because you're talking about a trio where one person can actually dance, and then you have a duo who vocally are not as strong, and it's just, and they're in a situation where the company doesn't necessarily allow them to write a whole lot. Admittedly so, the company has said that as recently as 2019. So it's a fascinating legacy, and it's one that I am proud of, no matter what the ups and downs, no matter the trauma, the drama, the turmoil. There's been a lot of it, and they have by no means escaped unscathed. There's been a lot of tragedy that they have missed, but there's been a lot of tragedy that started with them that had to be rectified, so that the idols that are here now have a different shot and have a chance to make it to that longevity, because most do not. And most who do make it lose their relevancy after year 10. These cats continue to remain relevant. To this day, idols look up to these five gentlemen. They won't say it about Yoo-chun, and I will talk about that at some other time, but you can't deny that they are greater than the sum of their parts. They are a unit, and he is a very integral part of that unit. He taught Jae-jung how to play piano, and he was the first one to start writing songs. I'm just saying, you can't erase something that SM has tried very hard to do. You can't nope the power of these five gentlemen out of existence. So, all that to say, I love Dongbang Shinki. I will always, always love Dongbang Shinki. As 2, as 3, as 5, they are the rising gods of the East. So, having gone through 2 of the major events that happened in 2023, I want to take a little bit of a break. It's just a little bit of an intermission, and kind of give you, first of all, every year I make a list of my 100 favorite albums of the year. I've been doing it since 2017, I think. Maybe before, because before then it was not a top 100. It became a top 100 because I just listened to so much music, and I continue to listen to so much music. And so I released that the first week of January. So you know my parameters, I listen to music up until the very last day of the year. And then after that, I listen to no more music, or at least I do not add any more music to my list from that year. So I will listen to new albums until December 31st. As soon as the bell strikes midnight on 2024, I will no longer add albums to the list. So at this point, I have listened to 110 albums, and I will compile that into a list of the ones that actually were my favorite 100 from the year. And I just kind of want to give you guys a little bit of a preview of that. So here are some of the albums that have made my list.
It's the way that you can ride. Think I'm meant to win another life, so break me up another time. You're up around me and you give me life, and that's why I leave her like the sage. Cleanse me of my demons, oh why? All these sins that I've been on the run, want me to stay. You need to fit away. I've been doing bad. Living inside a dream. I slay where the love is high. I put that on my mama, on my hood. I look fly, I look good. You can't touch my back.
Kind of piggybacking off of it, but I'm not going to do a clip this time. But piggybacking off of this, I want to talk about some of my favorite songs / musical moments for the year. And I have to start with the one that I've been utterly obsessed with since it released. When I do sort of this, I'm not going to give any details. I really kind of want you guys to look forward. And also, I kind of just don't want to make this super, super long. First thing that I've been utterly obsessed with is Willow's latest song, Alone. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, especially since it's the 50th anniversary of hip-hop. Willow is the single most talented person in the Smith family. No questions asked. Nobody can prove otherwise to me. She has a uniqueness to her sound that goes underappreciated, especially considering that she goes out of her way to improve. She is so dedicated to what she does that she takes lessons, she learns from other people, she is inspired and wears her inspirations on her sleeve, where she incidentally wears her heart. And Alone is kind of this amalgamation of everything she's become up until this point. It's sonically one of the most decadent songs that has come out. It's very simple, but the pacing and the use of breath, the use of cadence is masterful. This is someone who you can tell just by this single track, which is about 2 minutes and 15 seconds long, you know that she's a student of music. And it's such a powerful piece of music. Lyrically, it says a lot of the same things that a lot of people say. You know, lyrics are based on human experience, and human experience is similar. The circumstances are different, but the expression of pain is not new. But her delivery is so magnetic, and it's so dynamic, and literally dynamic. There's so many pits, there's so many valleys, there's so many crests. There's a certain level of plateau, but it's sort of this quiet before the storm. There's an incredible crescendo that comes back down into something very singular, very close to the chest, very intimate. And it's just one of the most musical pieces, certainly, that she's ever made, in my personal opinion, and one of the most beautiful pieces of music to come out of 2023. Speaking of gorgeous music to come out of 2023 that nobody expected despite wanting it, Dean came back. If you know, you know. Dean came back and he released a song called Die For You, and it's everything we wanted and didn't realize we wanted. It's, again, another piece of music that is extremely simple for what it is, but it has so many intricacies in it that makes it so beautiful and makes it indicative of what kind of artist Dean is. And the visual for it, again, something that he is dabbling heavily in, is his own direction, his own art direction, his own cinematography, his own photography. He's become very insistent upon doing that. And he's done it in a way that's so masterfully simplistic and free of ego. And there's a quietness to it, and there's a gentleness to it, but the power in his talent is just overwhelming. that he can take something that is, for all accounts, a simple love song and turn it into something that speaks very much to the humanity in falling in love and the pain that can actually cause you, and the choices you have to make about your own self-preservation as a result of it. And he does such a good job in being able to skillfully and unapologetically express himself. And he was sorely missed. He hasn't released anything full length since his debut. He's giving not so much Miss Lauryn Hill as he has Frank Ocean, but even Frank Ocean has given us 3. And so, he's working through what he needs to work through. The fact that he felt the strength in his spirit and the desire to create again, I think is a blessing for all of us. And I think it bodes well for what might happen next year. So Dean was a whole experience, as it is. Speaking of whole experiences, the Renaissance documentary. I know that a lot of people went to the tour. I didn't, and there was a reason for that. There were 2. One is more obvious than others. Expense. Rent had to be paid, and I'm sorry. I know that some people are like, yeah, I'll sacrifice it. A bitch will not sacrifice her home and her security for a concert, no matter how incredible I know that it was. The documentary, however, was something I was always going to see. And not necessarily for Beyonce specifically. I am enraptured by the creative process, specifically of musicians. I grew up around music, and it just fascinates me to no end to see how people visualize their musical concepts and the power behind having control over every aspect of it. And I have deep respect for Beyonce, and always have. I've never been her quote unquote fan. I've never been like the biggest fan of her music. I am more so lately because of the content of it, and because of, again, she's someone who is dedicated to improvement, to growth, to expanding, and to constantly evolutionizing her craft. And I have nothing but respect for people who do that, and to see it play out on screen, to see this person whose presence is so large, but she herself doesn't need to express that anything above a inside voice and still continues to get the job done, is because she cares so desperately for it. And it's not about ego. In fact, regardless of what you may think of the spectacle of it, because it is a spectacle and it's meant to be, but regardless of that, she completely is devoid of ego. And it's about the process. And she sacrifices her body for the process. She sacrifices her mental health in some aspects. I think she's gotten to a point, and I think a lot of artists have gotten to the point where they're no longer willing to sacrifice their mental security for the craft, for the game. They're no longer interested in ruining their mental stability for that. And I appreciate that. And what I appreciate about the Renaissance documentary, beyond it being a fun experience in the theater, and beyond, seeing the show and what it ended up being, and having fun with the music, and, it being a good fun time, and seeing a lot of Kiki, right? I had 2 drag mommies in college, so I have a very close personal bond with the culture, and seeing it displayed with such respect and such understanding of history and culture and reverence. This is an artist who is very reverential, and she gives her flowers to those who have inspired her always. And I appreciate that, but I appreciate more that she does make you understand that being a Black woman in any capacity, but especially a Black woman in charge of her own destiny, is a dangerous prospect for a lot of people, and a lot of people are threatened by it. And they show that by projecting and by imposing their will where it's not necessary, needed, or appropriate. And you see that play out on screen, but you also see that it doesn't stop her from making her vision come true. And even when there are hiccups, and even when things don't go right, because this is a live show, and that's the nature of the beast. Anything live, 10 things are going to go wrong, at least. That's how events work. That's how live gigs work. Shit's going to go bad. It just is. And she deals with it the way that most people deal with it. There's the frustration, and there's obviously got to be the conversation afterwards of why that happened. But you deal with it as it comes along, because ultimately it's got to get done. The adage, the show must go on, that's not just a cute saying. When you're in the midst of doing something creative, because you want to express that to other people, you can't stop because something happens. You can't stop because there's a hiccup in your plan. The plan has to shift. And I love seeing that process with any artist. And so anytime I get a chance to see a musical documentary, I'm going to go see it. And this was lovely. It was an incredible experience. It was lovely to see. The documentary is as long as the show, from what I understand. Because it's a long documentary. You have to stay in there for the long haul, and it's a lot of energy to keep up. And for everyone involved, and none more so than the people who are actually putting the show on. And it was fascinating to see. And I think that it was just something that especially if you weren't able to be at the show for whatever reason, it's a great thing to see, just to see the process behind it. And even if you did see the show, seeing the process and seeing how everything worked out, I think was just very fascinating. It's a great learning experience, and it's a great motivator for those who are creative, for those who are in a situation where they feel stifled, where their creativity feels stifled, where they feel like they're not heard, they're not seen, they're not taken seriously, where they mess up, or they make mistakes and are crucified for it, or they make mistakes because they're no longer engaged, because their soul is no longer theirs. You know, this is the type of thing that'll motivate you to move to your next stage. This is the show, and this is the reason why I put this on my list of favorite moments of the year, is because it has made me very, very made me very aware that it's time for my next step. Renaissance is not just the name of an album. It's a call to action. Renaissance is a verb right now. I need to renaissance my life. I need there to be a renaissance in my life. I need to live in a Renaissance era. It's taking on the responsibility of getting out of your misery, out of your stuckness, out of your hesitancy. And it's easier, it takes time. It absolutely does. It took Beyonce 4 years to make this. 4, where she was doing nothing. It took her 4 years. Everyone, doesn't matter how top of their game they are, they need a break. And they need a break so they can have their renaissance. And I am ready for my renaissance. I'm declaring it on this episode, this final episode of 2023. I'm ready for my renaissance. I'm ready to be in my next era. I'm ready to let go of the things that no longer serve me, and to the people who refuse to give me the respect that I absolutely deserve. It's the F you pay me movement. It's the find out era, It is all of these things. And this was not the first thing of this year that I consumed that had me in that mindset. There were a couple other pieces of media before this, but it certainly was kind of the last piece of media that really brought it all home to me. The next thing I want to talk about, talking about Renaissance, talking about life-changing things and life-affirming things. The Thriller 40th Anniversary documentary came out this year, and I'm not going to touch on that too much because, again, like with DBSK, we will be here for years. I'm just going to say it. It's not my favorite album of all time, but it is literally the greatest pop album ever created. And you have to understand the intricacy of what that album was and how Michael created it for you to actually understand that. You may not like pop music. You may not like Michael Jackson, but to deny that the album created what pop music is today is to deny your understanding of music. Somebody in the documentary said there are two things in music: before Thriller and after Thriller. And if you look at what was happening before then and you see what happened directly afterwards, he's absolutely right. Because a whole brand new understanding of the art form of pop iconography was created. What does it mean to be a pop icon? And how does one shepherd in an era of that? And how does one take their icon status to actually make things happen? Thriller made things happen. Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Bruce Swedien, Greg Gaines, everyone who worked on that album made something happen. And every moment was driven by this man who was mad because he was shut out of getting the recognition he was at. See, anger and pettiness really is a driving force for a lot of some of the most incredible things you will ever see. Thriller was a product of anger and pettiness. And 40 years later, we are still talking about it as the greatest pop album ever conceived. And it's not even so much that it's not arguable. You know, that is an arguable statement to have. But the fact that it's been around for 40 years and people are still having this conversation and still delving into, well, why is it the way that it is? How did it take a shy young man from Gary, Indiana, who'd had a phenomenal solo album before then, but it was still very much, you know, it was kind of what people described as his prom, his high school album. How did he go from that to still having this kind of, this world, I wouldn't say innocence. He at that point had been in the industry for a decade. He was 18, 19 when Off the Wall came out, and then releases an album that nobody could have expected at the age of, that came out in 82. Off the Wall was 78, 79. So he was 22, 23 when he released Thriller. I'm just saying, there's something behind that. And Thriller 40, the title of the documentary, it only skims the surface of what that means. I think and if we're talking about execution-wise and just kind of what it is, there are things that I think could have been a little bit better to really express the artistry in it. I think the commentary from some of the artists that were there was more of a standpoint of of you know, having that fan engagement, which is understandable. Every single artist on here is where they are because of this album, and so they get caught up in their admiration and adulation and absolute love for the man and the album. But I think what's missed a little bit is kind of the more sincere understanding of the technicality of that album and the work that went into it and the reasoning behind it. And it's a magical piece of music. And the documentary does explore that in some ways. Obviously, I'd love to see an expanded version of it. I know there was a lot that was left on the cutting room floor because there's so much that could be talked about. They didn't talk in great depth about Baby Be Mine. They didn't really talk in great depth about PYT or Lady in My Life. They didn't really talk deeply about kind of the sequencing and why it was the way that it was, the order, why certain songs made it and certain songs didn't. Obviously, they talked about Human Nature because there was a toss-up for that one, for Quincy Jones in particular. And they could have done a little bit more to dive into the mechanics of it, but ultimately, this was just a celebration of a moment in time that shifted, absolutely forever shifted, the dynamics of what it meant to not just make pop music or what pop music meant. It shaped the dynamics of music in general for the entire world culture. It shifted what it meant to make an album and have impact. And so, yeah, Thriller 40, kind of a big deal. I've watched it at least twice a week since it's come out. Again, another one where I just love music documentaries and seeing the process, but this one was more just a celebration of a life and an album that will take some time to replicate, I believe. So I want to talk about that. The last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of my favorite moments from this year is a little song called Yams. It is by Masego featuring Devin Morrison, and it's a fun song. Musically, it's so crisp. It's simple, but it's so delightful to listen to. And sonically, it's such a gift. It's such a pleasure. When you add the New Deco ensemble to that, New Deco is kind of this new age orchestra. This is classically trained artists. This is a classical orchestra in the traditional sense of an orchestra, but with the primary focus to celebrate and to give flowers to and to acknowledge and to put at the forefront Black and brown creatives. The co-founder and co-director of this is not himself a Black or brown person, but he understands the necessity for it. He's an ally, certainly. And when Masego and Devin Morrison stepped on that stage and sang Yams with this orchestra behind it and the intricacy, how the orchestra seemed to be this third singer because they were harmonizing with the orchestra. You don't know, Masego has been around for quite some time, and he is a trained saxophonist. He's a multi-instrumentalist, but his primary instrument is saxophone. And he is able to integrate it in a way that is very reminiscent of what you would consider early jazz pop. I say pop because jazz was the pop music of that era. And it's just the way that he has so much respect for music while still maintaining his goofiness, because he's an absolute goof. He's silly beyond all reason. He's so hilarious, but make no mistake of his seriousness about the craft, because his work speaks for itself. And when you add this orchestral grandeur to it with the simplistic vocal and a simplistic song that, yes, in its original form is gorgeous. It's a beautiful R&B song. Add the orchestra on top of that, and the dynamics of it just explode reason. It's just such a beautiful song. If you haven't ever seen that, if you've never watched it, if you've never taken it on, I implore you to look up the Yams New Deco Ensemble version, because it just proves, I think, without a shadow of a doubt, that it proves without a shadow of doubt the elegance of Black and brown artistry, and how, again, a lot of our creativity, I would say a huge percentage of our creativity and our ability to express stems from heartache and pain and trauma, and we are able to externalize that through some truly transformative art. And this was one of those occasions where it really rings true that once we have our hands on something that's vibrant and musical in nature and is for the sake of telling a story, no matter what that story is, it goes beyond just a form of entertainment. This is a form of survival, and it's a form of therapy, and it's a form of lovemaking, and it's a form of communion and fellowship and community. And this version of Yams definitely played into that for me. So those are my 4 major musical moments from 2023. And these are major for me because they continue to have an effect on me. And I continue to go back to them when I need something to revitalize me, to give me some form of happiness. I've only seen the Renaissance documentary once. Once it becomes available, outside of the theater, I will watch it multiple times because it just has that kind of influential effect on me. But generally speaking, for all of them, I've been obsessed with each one of these moments because they've stirred something in me that have made me want to move forward and to continue this love affair that I have with music. So there you go. I singled out these 4. They were the first ones that came to mind, but there were a lot of moments throughout the year that did have an impression on me. I'm just going to mention them. I'm not going to go into deep detail, except maybe for one. The Terrell show in general, but he brought back all of the former members of Destiny's Child, as well as the current members of Destiny's Child, and except for Miss B, obviously. But to have all of these women on here talking about their experience was beautiful. So Terrell Grice definitely is a moment in and of himself. A couple of the Tiny Desks stood out to me, the Babyface Tiny Desk, and I talked about that earlier in the year. And Duran Bernard, you just have to see it to believe it. If you're wondering, and if you do see it, and if you have seen it and don't know what's happening, again, this is how you know for the culture. It was a Halloween-ish episode, and they were dressed as characters from the Proud Family. So, just to give you a little bit of foundation for that. But those were 2 Tiny Desk moments that really stood out for me. I talked about Kim Jae-jung in my whole spiel about Dongbang Shinki, and he has his own YouTube channel, and he has his own talk show where he's cooking, because this dude is known for 3 things. No, he's known for multiple things, but one of the big things he's known for is being able to cook, and the boy cleans. Like, the dude can cook, okay? He gets down. Okay, everyone who's ever seen him, they're like, this man too pretty. Nah, this man gets down, okay? And so he made a show around food and conversation, and it's a lovely show, and it's incredible to see him so free with himself. And I might dive into what I mean by that a little bit later, but he's so free with himself, and I love it. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'll go into just slightly a little bit of detail about this. I saw Janet Jackson's Together Again tour when it came to my city, and it's my second time seeing Janet. I saw her on the State of the World when she came to where I was living previously, and I will say that show was more dynamic. But the Together Again tour, the show, her mic is on 100% of the time. And she just wants you to know that as I'm making my exodus, that I was never a game. I was never to be trifled with. Yes, my microphone is on. And yes, I'm still dancing harder than my younger dancers. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit, only because I have loved Janet since I was a child. And I don't know what it was that drew me to her. It wasn't that connection with Michael, because I think when I was younger, I didn't even make the connection that they were related. Subconsciously, obviously, I knew this, but I didn't make that connection. They were 2 separate people to me, and I love them for different reasons. And I instantly loved Janet. It wasn't the all-out passing out, screaming, and running out of the room that I had with Michael, apparently. Allegedly, because I don't remember any of that. But I have always had this deep, intense admiration for Janet Jackson. And being able to see her twice, I count myself exceptionally lucky to have been able to be in a space to do that. And I note that is a place of privilege that not a lot of people have. A lot of people have a lot more privilege than me to go see Beyonce, but I was very thrilled to be in that auditorium when she came to perform what seems like, she has not, I think, verbally really confirmed it. She's kind of said it in a little bit of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that this is her last tour. There are a lot of legendary last tours that are happening and coming up or either coming to an end, and I got to see one of them from one of my absolute favorite artists. So I had to mention that. I didn't list 4 major moments, and they are major moments for me, but there are still, there were a few that still really stood out to me, and Janet Jackson's Together Again tour was one of those. I kind of want to end this on reflection. That's what it is. I want to end this on reflection. The first thing I want to really reflect on is what 2023 has taught me. And I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, because I've learned a lot about myself this year. I've learned that I can be assertive. I've learned that I can really speak up to the things that I believe in. My knees might shake and my voice might crack a little bit, but I still speak in a full voice. I don't shy away from things. And a lot of that has to come through, with frustrations that have been going on in my life. But you get to a certain point where you no longer you're no longer willing to accept what people are willing to give you. And I have reached my limit, my capacity for taking what people are willing to give me. At this point, I demand what I deserve, and I get to name the conditions of what that is. And I'm at this point where I'm ready, like I said, for my renaissance. And my renaissance is owning myself and owning my power and owning my skill set, my craft, and being responsible to myself and being beholden to myself. Not giving my creativity for somebody else's ego and their public adulation. Like, I'm not here to make you look good. I'm no longer in a place where that's what the end goal is, to make you look good. I'm here to express myself in the best way that I can, and I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to express myself for myself. I'm ready to begin a new life where I take priority. And it's not, for me, lessons aren't hard to learn. They just take some time for me. And I have to learn them in ways that seem difficult. The thing that has kind of kept me going, there's been a couple things that have kept me going. One, as I say, I'm not the biggest Beyonce fan, a lot of Beyonce. A lot of smudging. If you don't know, that means that's essentially a bundle of herbs and you light them, and the energy from that, not only that, just the soothing quality of some herbs, it just helps to calm the mind. And that's just the chemical reaction that one has to these specific herbs when they're lit. And mine are, I think it's sage, lavender, and vanilla is what I have in that bundle. And I've had to do that a few times because I've needed to clear my brain. I've needed to not even just clear my brain, because that's part of what it is, especially when it comes to the lavender, just the calming mechanic of it. But I've also needed something to purge negativity from my space, because that has drenched my space for far too long. And I no longer want to accept that. So I've had to do a lot of that, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of being angry. The lessons that I've learned have come a lot out of anger, and in some ways helplessness. I never lose hope necessarily, but I do oftentimes, or have in the past, felt like I'm in a situation that I can't get out of, that is out of my control, and that I need some kind of way to push past that. Meditation has been helpful, exercise has been helpful, even though I've had a lot more exhaustion than I've had in the past few years. A lot of that came in 2023. I think a lot of people are dealing with fatigue. I think most people are dealing with fatigue from this year as a result of the last 4 or 5 years. And I've learned that even through all that, see, this is something that I kind of subconsciously knew, but to have it come to the forefront of my mind, that when things are the most outrageous, when they're the most frustrating, when things seem to just happen out of nowhere, when things kind of seem like the universe is conspiring against you, that's when transition's about to happen. Growing pains is a very real thing, and you don't only go through them once when you're turning into a teenager. Growing pains are something that happens continuously throughout your life, and it's a very physical and direct and literal statement. You are growing into something new, and growth hurts because the body isn't used to it until it becomes used to it. And so there's been a lot of growing pains, but I'm still here, and I've made it through that. If you're listening to this, you've gone through a lot of growing pains, but you're still here. And thank you for spending some of that time with me. See, we're already over an hour, and I said to myself, no, we're going to make this real fast. Of course we're not. You should know me by now. This is a girl who has no concept of writing anything under 500 words. I don't know how to do it. So I do know how to do it, but it's very easy for me to go on tangents and to not necessarily go on tangents, but just to have a lot to say. That's something else that I've had to come to grips with, that sometimes I have a lot to say and that I need to cut down. Not because it's not relevant, but for the moment, it's not necessary. And it can go somewhere else. And still be relevant in that context. I've learned that my imperfection is no indication of my ability. And for a long time, that was hard for me to accept, mainly because I define myself so much by work. I've been working since I was 13. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but I've been working since I was 13. And so I define a lot of who I am based on my ability to work and to do a job. And I no longer want that to be the thing that defines me. I want to be defined by passion and compassion and love and energy, positive energy. And I want to be defined as someone who made some form of positive impact. Ultimately, I guess it doesn't really matter if people believe that or not, because at the end of the day, nobody's immortal, right? We're eventually we're going to come to the end of our earthly journey. But I do want to leave an impression, not an impression as in people think of me the way that they think of somebody like a Michael Jackson, right? Or a Beyonce. Or I don't want to be a brand. I still want to be a person, but I want to be a person that people think of me and they're like, she was a good person. The space is better because she was in it. I do kind of want that. And it's okay that I want that. And I've learned that I am not required to be perfect. Oftentimes, especially as Black women particularly, you feel this requirement to be perfect based on a patriarchal idea of what it means to be perfect, which in and of itself is a contradiction, because there's nothing perfect about those who decide they have control of what society is supposed to think. I've learned that regardless of how much I know firsthand about my history, I am bliggity black, blackity black, and I've always known that, but I didn't realize how extremely militant I am until the end of last year and then starting into this year. I didn't realize that was a thing. And I've always been I guess, again, it's one of those subconscious things. Like, you know it subconsciously, but it doesn't come to the forefront until something pushes you. I don't know what it was that pushed me to that. It's a combination of things, but I am very much, I'm so dedicated to my people. And regardless of I'm not an activist by any means. I'll say that. I'm not an activist by any means, but I will 100% go to bat for my people. And I will 100% continue to pursue things that elevate Black and brown and indigenous women identified folks, non-binary folks. It's just something that I've been passionate about for decades. And I'm ready to lean so heavily into that now. And I think that that's where my next journey is. And so, from what I've learned about myself and what I've learned about how I can get to my next step, I want to talk about what I'm looking forward to and give you kind of a little bit of a peek into where my head is right now. I have an ambition, but the one thing that is going to happen early next year, it'll probably be mid-January. I was hoping it was going to be much earlier than this, but things and stuff in life, right? But mid-January is my deadline I'm giving myself. I am releasing another album. For those who don't know, I do create music. I will not call myself a musician, but it's fun for me. I do some production to kind of clear my head, and I created one that is now going through the mastering process. That's why it's going to take longer to come out than I had anticipated or had given myself a deadline for. But, you know, again, life and things and stuff and all that. And I'm excited about this one. I think it's the best one I've made so far. It's certainly the most fun that I've had making an album. This will be my third. My third release, but it's my second full length. And yeah, I'm super stoked about it. So I can't wait for you guys to hear it. I will try my best. This is the other thing. It's not even resolutions. It's just what things I'm trying to anticipate for myself. I anticipate being more actively trying to promote myself. I'm not great at it, and I despise social media. But I will be trying to actively find a way to promote the things that I want to happen next year. Another thing that I am anticipating is the official establishment of my company. You'll notice that there are 3 M's in the music podcast, and there's a reason for that. For anyone who has visited the blog, you will notice that it's called Madasa Music. There's a reason for that. And so I am looking forward to really investing in my own brand. Not me as a brand, but in the brand that I'm trying to build and the business that I'm trying to make happen for the specific purpose of what I just said, supporting, elevating, pushing to the forefront the creativity in all of those forms for Black, brown, and indigenous people. So those are the things that I am majorly looking forward to. I am looking forward to going back to Korea. I do want to do that. I have always intended for that to be a yearly thing for me because I love the country despite all of its bullshit, but every country has its bullshit, right? And so you take it as it comes. I just feel really safe there. So I love being there. And the last time I was there wasn't for work. I usually am there for some form of work, but I was just there to experience it. And it was a wonderful experience. Even in the terrible moments, it was a wonderful experience. So, what I am looking forward to is more music, more wonderful music. I'm looking forward to see what Dean is going to give us. I'm looking forward to seeing what Paris Jackson actually is going to be giving us. Because I think that she's going to be releasing an album next year. So I'm hoping that comes to fruition. Looking forward to what Willow's going to do. Looking forward to seeing Janet's last album. The one that she actually announced as saying what was going to come next. And seeing what that's going to look like. Just music in general. And there's a lot to anticipate. Even though people may not really believe it. I know that there are people who believe that in terms of film. And that's another conversation for another day. Because I do like to talk about film. But in music, people equate music to what they hear on the radio and not to a form of expression. And radio, I guess, is an outdated term, what they hear on TikTok. And it's not a form of branding. Music is a form of actually purging your soul of the things that need to get out of it. It's a cleansing ritual, music. Any form of creativity is not done solely for consumption of other people. Because it's out in the public, that's just a byproduct of what happens. But ultimately, it's about being your most authentic, truest, realest, ugliest, most beautiful self. And there's been a lot of music that's happened this year that's pointing in that being a continuing trend, regardless of what trends might be saying. I'm looking forward to, and I mean, this has been ongoing for the past 5 years, and I've not talked about this, but I haven't talked about a lot of K-pop, actually. I haven't talked a lot about K-pop on this podcast. I think that I will try to do that a little bit more, because I'll have y'all out here believing that I don't actually like Korean music, when in fact Korean music is incredible. Music in and of itself is incredible, so why wouldn't it be incredible in a language that I don't speak well? I speak it a little bit, but I need to do a little bit more of that. So we'll put that on the list of things I'm anticipating for next year, to talk about more Korean music, because there's a lot that I can talk about, and I have a lot of friends that I can invite on too. So let's anticipate that. More interviews. We had our first one with Maylad. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. She's an incredible artist, and I can't wait to see what her next renaissance is going to be, because Canon Metis, her album that she released this year, was gorgeous. So, yes, follow her on all the things, listen to all of her music, please, please, please. Melat, M-E-L-A-T. Her latest album was Canon Metis. This was not meant to be a plug, but she deserves to be plugged, and I'm looking forward to more of her work, and I'm looking forward to more interviews, and I hope you're looking forward to more interviews as well. I'm hopefully going to be able to grow this audience and be more consistent. I'm no longer going to kind of behold myself to a schedule or timetable, because, you kind of set yourself up to failure when you say, I'm going to do this every Thursday and Friday. You're like, we're going to do this when we have the actual content and wherewithal to do it. So, but it does mean that I will be more consistent. And that also means I will have more people for you to engage with. And those are some of the major things that I'm excited about. Obviously, my new album is something that I've been waiting for it to come out for such a long time. It's been since October that I've wanted to release this album. So I am very much anticipating the middle of January releasing my next album. You will notice that all the music that is on this podcast, for the most part, but mostly all of the intros and outros are my own music. You'll know if it's not mine. It's very obvious. The gap in quality, the gap in skill is very obvious. But I do make it a point to use my own music, and that's no exception for this week, this episode, this final episode of 2023. The opening song is from my new album, so I am excited about it, and I won't tell you the title yet, but it's going to be a splendid album. I guarantee it. It's going to be fantastic. For me anyway, I'm excited about it. I don't know. You may not like it. That's fine. I love this album, so I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it. Okay. I think this is going long enough. I intended for this to be 45 minutes. I don't know who I think I am. Why I thought 45 minutes was even a possibility. But I thank you. I want to close this year, this episode, with thank you, as I do with every episode. But this thank you is coming from a place of exceptional gratitude. I'm always gracious for your attention and for you coming here to listen to me ramble and fangirl about music in no particular order or balance, just me talking about music in different ways and capacities. And you are appreciated and loved and important, and regardless of what you take out of this, or regardless of what I say is informative for you, or if it has any value, if nothing else, I hope that you understand that your place in this life, in this existence, in this plane is not based on what you can create. It's not based on your productivity. It's not based on what you contribute to society. Your place is important because you are important, because you are here, because you are human, because you are now, because you are alive and living and loving and attempting to navigate the craziness that is life. There are no rules. Society has built rules for better or for worse. Some are for necessity, some are good, some are arbitrary, but life does not follow rules. Life happens, and you're just trying your best to move along with it. You're trying your best to happen along with life. So for the sake of yourself and your sanity, just live. Just live. You're not required to do anything. And you certainly are required to get recognition, but you shouldn't feel like you haven't accomplished anything if you haven't done anything major, whatever that means. You should just be happy and proud that you took your next breath and that you were able to eat something today. This is not about being gracious for what you have, which, that's a part of it, but this is about being proud of yourself for just being yourself and for just waking up and walking around. And even if all you did was sit in a chair and watch anime all day, you lived life how you wanted to live it at that moment. And if you're still trying to figure out how you want to live life, take your time. Time, as infinite as it is finite for those who have a mortal clock, it is. But there's no saying that you have to have it all figured out. No human being who leaves this earth has it all figured out. The only thing I believe people figure out on their way out is that life is worth living. Life is lived. That's all you can figure out. And the only thing you can do is make peace with that. You have to make peace with your life. And you have to make peace with yourself. So you may as well do something that makes you happy. I always say this, if you're not hurting anybody, because that for me is a big thing. If you're not hurting anybody, if you're not hurting yourself, I guess you're allowed to do that. You shouldn't want to, but if you're not, and we won't dig into that, but if you're not hurting yourself or others, if you're not putting yourself in a situation where by virtue of society's laws, you're going to get into trouble, you're going to be put in jail or fined an enormous amount of money. You can literally do whatever you want. But you can do whatever you want. You can. The consequences are what they are, but that doesn't mean that you still can't do those things and deal with what happens afterwards. Again, as long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as your goal is just to live and to live in positivity, you're allowed to do whatever makes you happy. And that is something that I came to the conclusion about this year. I'm allowed to do what makes me happy. And so are you. It's now gotten to the point where my cat's like, you've talked long enough. So if he does make a cameo, there you go. But thank you, everyone, for a year of experimentation, trial and error, of trying something I've never done before. I always talk to myself anyway, so I may as well put it out in the universe, right? It might affect somebody. People might get something out of it. It might interest you. You might learn something, right? So I appreciate you. Even if you didn't get any of those things from it, if it was just something put on in the background, that's fine. I appreciate you spending time with me this year, for the amount of time that I did it. Look out for my top 100 coming in the first week of January. Look out for my new album coming out by mid-January. And just look out for more wonderful, fantastic, splendid things. And certainly all things music. Who's the cross?